Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Is Asia the next study destination? I'm Cara Skikne. I head up thought leadership at Studyportals. Today, we're going to be having a look at Asia as a global study destination, look at evolving student demand patterns, what universities can do, both universities in the region and those wanting to partner with universities in the region to unlock opportunities. This webinar comes after a joint report with Studyportals and British Council called Asia, Latin America, and MENA in Global Education, Emerging Trends as Destination and Source Regions. And in a moment, we're going to just have a look at some of the key findings around Asia before we get into the conversation. Joining me today, we have Shahrill Sabarudin. He is the Acting Chief Marketing Officer of Education Malaysia Global Services, which is an organization responsible for promoting Malaysia as an international education hub of choice. He spearheads their digital marketing initiatives, and his vision is to strengthen Malaysia's position as a leading global education destination. We also have Marcel, Bandur, Senior Business Developer at Studyportals. He is an education strategy specialist with a decade of experience in the Asian education space, and he works crafting effective marketing and recruitment strategies that help universities with international recruitment and also diversifying their international recruitment. And last but not least, we have Megan Agnew, Global Partnerships Manager at British Council. The British Council is the UK's international organisation for cultural relations and educational opportunities, and the joint owner of the IELTS test used by more than 12,000 organisations around the world. And Megan is a long-time collaborator with Studyportals on a number of joint reports that we've done looking at English taught programs around the world. And I'd like to hand over to Megan now to take us through some of those key findings from the report.
That's great. Thanks, Cara. Yes, I think this report is our 12th in the series and marks over 6 years of looking at English taught programs and their trends. So very exciting. I'll just share my screen. So hopefully you can all see my full screen. Is that okay?
Good.
Great. Okay, so yes, as Cara mentioned, this is just a few of the key findings of the Global Trends report. So the Trends report focuses on Asia, Latin America, and MENA. I do have a QR code there if you're quick enough to download the report if you haven't already, and I will share that QR code at the end of the slides, and also throughout the webinar as well, we'll share that link. So don't worry if you miss it, but the report can be downloaded from this link. So the report shows the supply of English medium education and the demand for English programs across Asia, Latin America, and the MENA regions. The student demand has been measured using page views on the Studyportals website. And obviously, we're here today to talk about Asia. So we'll go to the key findings or the headlines from the report on Asia. So Asia is now dominating the English medium education outside of the main Anglophone countries, with over 20,000 English programs across the region and across 600 ranked universities, and that number is growing. There are changes that are happening in key markets throughout the region. And Asia as a region has it all. It has growth. It also has stagnation and decline in some markets across both supply and demand. So we'll take a look at those in a bit more detail. And it's quite interesting. You'll see if you read the full report, but hopefully from these slides as well, to see when you look at supply and demand next to each other, what countries are doing, and how they're reacting to demand, by increasing or decreasing, in some cases, the supply of English taught programs. So Asia shows, as a region, strong maturity. Again, with over 20,000 English taught programs on offer, most of those remain campus-based and are concentrated at the master's and bachelor's levels. So you'll see there on the screen, short courses and PhD courses are also included, but master's and bachelor's still dominate at the supply. The demand aligns closely with the supply, with nearly 69% of campus-only interest focus on master's programs. Online and blended formats remain limited in their supply, but there is visible demand for flexible learning, particularly in short courses. Just to say as well that the date range for all of these figures is July 23 to June 25, unless it says otherwise on the screen. So just bear that in mind in terms of the date range. Now, if we break down to country level, firstly by the more established education locations across the region, in the first column there on the right-hand side, the yellow and blue rows. So they show the demand for bachelor's, which is captured in yellow, and for master's captured in the dark blue colour. Then on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a chart which shows whether a destination has experienced growth in supply, which is represented by the blue bars, or decline in the red, and that is per study level. So supply volumes remain relatively high in China, India, Malaysia, and South Korea. And India, you'll see, stands out with expansion across both bachelor and master's courses. And Singapore, there towards the bottom, also recorded significant supply growth of over 63% at bachelor level and 27.8% at master's level. In terms of demand, Japan and China stand out with the highest levels of student demand overall. Japan leads in master's level demand. Japan attracted over 455,000 page views for master's programs, while China shows the strongest relative growth for bachelor's at 32.6%. And other major hubs such as Malaysia, India, and Taiwan have shown modest yet positive growth in demand, particularly for master's programs. On the other hand, South Korea and Singapore each show significant declines at both bachelor and master's levels, and that could indicate a waning short-term interest, despite both being traditionally popular destinations. Thailand and Hong Kong have also seen mild to moderate declines or stagnation. In the emerging destinations, Brunei stands out dramatically with a 250% increase in master's level program supply, although this is from a relatively low base. Sri Lanka also has seen significant rise in bachelor's level offerings, nearly 91%. While Vietnam and Macau have expanded modestly at both bachelor's and master's levels. In the volume and change of demand, Indonesia and Vietnam have experienced sharp increases in demand, with Vietnam's bachelor's level nearly doubling at over 100%. And Indonesia seeing a 37.6% rise at bachelor's level. Then at the master's level, Brunei shows a dramatic spike in demand despite the relatively smaller volume of the country, which may reflect increased program visibility. In contrast to that, several destinations have experienced substantial declines, including Kazakhstan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, which all show drops exceeding 20% at one or both bachelor and master's levels. In terms of international demand for studying in Asia, this is diverse and ranges from regional neighbours such as India, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. And the students there seek to study outside their home country, but still within Asia, still within the region. And there's also more distant markets, including the US, the UK, and Nigeria. So you'll see there the change in demand in either green or red text. At the bachelor's level, the majority of demand is driven by South Asian countries. So Bangladesh, India, Pakistan accounting for the highest absolute demand. Bangladesh in particular produced the most demand, which significantly grew by 32.9%. And Pakistani demand also rose by 17.8%. This is at the bachelor's level, and at the master's level, India dominates that demand with over 246,000 page views generated towards other destinations across Asia, although the demand did decrease by 15.5%. It's quite interesting. In contrast to that, Bangladesh and Vietnam produced more demand at this level, so 16.6% for Bangladesh and 21.2% for Vietnam. So this analysis shows steady demand from non-Asian markets. The US remains a consistent source of both bachelor's and master's interest, while countries like the UK and Turkey are top sources and growing sources of interest for on-campus master's programs. So onto the city level trends, so bringing it down from country level now to city level. Across Asia, key educational cities such as Tokyo, Beijing, Seoul, and Kuala Lumpur continue to attract the highest volume of page views on Studyportals pages for on-campus bachelor's and master's, and consistently appear among the top 3 cities per country. While the absolute demand remains strong in these cities, growth has been either modest or declining in some cases. So for instance, Singapore and Seoul have seen a decline in master's level interest, even as overall volumes remain high. Suzhou in China stands out for growth at both bachelor's and master's levels, and potentially highlights the shifting geography of demand from traditional hubs, so those traditional city hubs, towards perhaps lesser known but increasingly visible cities with growing international partnerships. And Vietnamese cities like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh saw rapid bachelor's level demand growth. These shifts mirror national efforts to position Vietnam as an international study destination, even as the outbound student migration numbers continue to outpace inbound numbers. This analysis is always my favorite of the Studyportals reports that we do. So this is the subject or the discipline analysis of how well different disciplines perform across Asia in terms of student demand in relation to program supply using page views per program. At the bachelor's level, the most supplied disciplines include business and management. You may guess these, engineering and technology, and computer science and IT. Each have over 800 programs listed. However, when we look at these programs through the student demand lens, per program, computer science and IT, medicine and health, and arts, design and architecture stand out with well above average page views per program. Then at the master's level, supply landscape is led by business, engineering and natural sciences, but the overall engagement is higher, with an average of 271 page views per program. You might notice that the consistent overperformance of computer science at both levels might be driven by Asia's digital transformation initiatives and government investments in innovation, and also the rising demand for data, AI, and policy-related expertise. The report also considers the role of transnational education in the three markets and compares the number of TNE institutions and the volume of student demand across the three regions. You'll see from the charts on the right that Asia consistently has the highest number of TNE institutions, rising from 20 institutions in 2019 to over 30 by mid-2025. This confirms Asia's position as the primary global destination currently for TNE activity, both in the institutional presence and also the attractiveness to students. On the ranking side, Asia is not only large in its program offer, it's also increasingly visible among global elite institutions. In the Times Higher Education rankings, Asian universities doubled their representation in the top 100 institutions between 2016 and 2025. And the QS data also confirms this trend. So we see Asia consistently fielding over 20 elite institutions and maintaining steady growth in the mid-tier bands as well. And finally, we quite often, if you've been in education for a long time, like me, you'll be used to exploring Asia as an origin or a source market. So the report also explores Asia in these terms as well. These charts show which destinations attract the most demand from Asia. At the bachelor's level, the US and Italy are tied at the top, capturing 9.1 and 9% of demand, respectively, followed closely by Germany and the UK. Hungary, Lithuania, and France have seen credible gains, while other traditional Anglophone destinations, such as Canada, have seen modest declines in their share of demand. The master's picture, the preference hierarchy has shifted quite significantly. So Germany emerges as the leading destination, followed by the UK and the US, all of which have a reputation for postgraduate education, particularly in STEM subjects. And you'll see the big story there. Canada, the Canada share contracts quite sharply, while in locations such as France, Austria, and Ireland are gaining momentum. So quite a mixed picture there for us to look at. And with that, I'll just quickly share the QR code again for the report and hand back to Cara. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Megan. And the slides and this recording will be shared with all the attendees and registrants. Also, if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to add those to the Q&A. We do have some pre-submitted questions that I'll be posing to them, but also good to get your input now. To kick off the conversation, I'd like to ask Shahrill, what do you find the most interesting finding from the report?
Hi, Cara, thanks. So, well, the report sheds some lights in terms of, the dynamism of the global movement of fluidity between, different countries. It's quite interesting to see that countries like Singapore has the dichotomy between supply and demand. Supply is increasing, but demand seems to be like relatively low for that number. So I'm not sure what is primarily the reason for this. Of course, this taps into one primary source of information, which is the page views and also the real demand from Studyportal. But it tells a lot. It gives us an insight of the behavior of the international market, specifically when there are these kind of, supply demand kind of dynamics. I think that is where TNE plays a very important role, because if all of these supplies could then be converted into a joint program with other neighboring countries, perhaps even particularly Malaysia, then it means that we can pretty much balance out the gap in terms of the demand and also the supply that's pretty much available there. So that's pretty much my 2 cents in terms of it. I mean, there's more to what Megan has articulated. I think there's so much more to actually explore, and I'm looking forward to actually digest it one by one.
Great, thank you. Marcel, can I put the same question to you? What do you think is most interesting from the report findings?
Definitely. Thank you, Cara, for asking. So it's of no surprise that Asia is up and coming. There's a lot of demand, but this is not uniform. This is not across all the countries. And what I find really surprising in the report is the decline of interest towards Singapore and South Korea. And I have some theories why this might be the case. Of course, I think this mirrors the larger trends of students looking for affordability and looking for value, which in Singapore and South Korea being the more expensive destinations might not be there as well. Just to compare maybe Malaysia and Singapore, whereas in Singapore, it's become very, very difficult for graduates to seek employment, and the requirements have gone up for foreigners to seek employment here. And actually the pathways to labor have become increasingly more complex. On the other side, Malaysia built specific dedicated immigration lanes at the airports for international students. So it's really also the government support that plays a larger role. And also the students are becoming more decisive in terms of affordability. I think that that's where TNEs also do come in, especially with the overseas branch campuses, where they can build and bring that accessibility and value into Asia. So students don't have to travel out. The costs do actually matter as well. In this way, there is a lot more intra-regional, interregional south-south mobility, not what it used to be in terms of students coming from the south to the global north, but within the region as well. It also is about market saturation. So maybe that's also the case in Singapore, where there's an oversupply of programs, and possibly this could be crowding the market, and it's become more competitive as well. So I think in this way, the countries that will be really gaining more will be the ones that are open, that are communicating the value, and the ones that are bridging affordability with quality.
Now, Megan, you touched on the fact that Asia has been seen over your years in education primarily as a sending market. What do you think has changed to turn the region into such a strong destination? And do you think the rise of English taught programs is making Asia more competitive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned at the start, we've done quite a number of reports now on this topic, and we've seen the growth. I mean, Asia has always been in the leads, outside of the big four or the big six Anglophone countries. And you hear now, the big 14 is the term that people are using. But I think certainly that growth in English taught programs has really driven that explosion. But you're also now seeing that governments, as Marcel mentioned, they're really behind those programs and those initiatives, so that you've got all of this robust government support and policy for English medium education more broadly across, across the locations, across the countries. And that's really driving the rankings that we're seeing. It's driving the institutions to become more professional, if you like, really competitive on the global stage in terms of higher education. So I think having that government support, completely agree with Marcel that that's really driving the growth. And as Shahrill said as well, the visa and work regulations and pulling and attracting international students. All of these things have really helped, make Asia what it is today. That's not to say that growth is always a success story. There are, as we just saw with Singapore and certain locations in China, sometimes that is a policy and a drive to change how education is in those locations. But also what we've seen in the more traditional markets, so UK, US, Canada, and the politicization of international students, we are seeing that play out now in Asian markets. So Singapore, Hong Kong, all of those traditional Asian education hubs, there has been concerns by public, by students around accommodation and those kinds of things, which is exactly what we've seen in other markets as well. So yeah, I think while there's clear positive stories, there's also that underlying pressures, if you like, to really focus on the growth, but do it in a sustainable way.
Shahrill, can you give us some insights into what these government initiatives look like? Which ones have been successful?
Cara, thanks. So Malaysia has an overarching ambition to achieve around 250,000 international students actively enrolled in Malaysia by 2030. That's just 5 years. And minus 2025, which is ending next month, means that there's just 4 more years for us to achieve this overarching ambition. So apart from Malaysia being uniquely positioned at the center of, the waterways of the east and west of the world, geographically it's pretty much strategic. In terms of the quality, there's an increasing number of accolades that Malaysia has actually pretty much achieved in terms of its institutional recognition. But more than that, there's a lot more things for us to look at. I mean, just now the data shows that the growth in terms of Malaysia's demand is still pretty constant, pretty much the same pattern as we see in China. So we are building a lot of things that are robust in terms of its policy, that's sustainable in terms of its future-proof. One thing, of course, Malaysia being one of the most cheapest nations in terms of higher tertiary education, we still would like to provide ecosystem for funding. So Malaysia itself, we have our own government scholarship. It's called Malaysia International Scholarship, MIS. We provide a number of it, around 100 for outstanding masters and PhD students, specifically for Commonwealth countries and developing nations, which covers not just the tuition fees, but also a monthly stipend of around 1,500 ringgit, which is around 400 to 500 US dollars, depending on the currency variation. So, I mean, even though we are still cheap, we are 10 times cheaper in terms of the cost of living index compared to Singapore. We are still providing a mechanism for funding. That's pretty much one thing, one avenue, or just one example. There's a lot more. We are working together, EMGS specifically, working together with a few other nations, Kazakhstan, Bangladesh, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, to provide some kind of joint funding. So students from these countries could pretty much find it much more affordable to study in Malaysia, even though that we are providing it pretty much cheaply. So, and that's one. And then because the story about funding doesn't just end in terms of supply, it's also in terms of exploration. In ASEAN, we are building a system called the ASEAN Global Exchange for Mobility and Scholarship, which is an online platform to provide an aggregated view of all of the available scholarships within the ASEAN regions for ASEAN students. You see, in terms of ASEAN mobility, in terms of its number, it's still low. I think it's around the high 10%. So to encourage intra-ASEAN mobility, this becomes one of the biggest game changer that we imagine happening. And since Malaysia assumed the chairmanship this year, we are pushing ahead with something a bit more tangible in the form of these ASEAN Gems. And right now we have around 300 placements for scholarships that amounts to around 4.6 million US dollars available for students within the ASEAN regions to encourage this kind of mobility. So those are things in terms of, how we work towards funding, even though that we are, relatively cheap to the rest of the world. But also in terms of policy, we aligned ourselves to the realities of the geopolitical realities of the day. We make sure that while some of the countries are closing their borders or making a bit more strict in terms of the visa regimes, we are welcoming it a bit more. But in a structured way, that's why we have institutions and systems in place. We have digitized our visa processing specifically for student visas. We also have our own ecosystem or infrastructure around students. So like what Marcel mentioned just now, outside of any other country in the world, Malaysia has its own counter at the airport to welcome international students to process their documents and bring them to dedicated immigration lanes specifically for international students. So they don't go through the typical immigration process. Malaysia builds an infrastructure to welcome international students. So that's aligned towards whatever policy that we develop to encourage mobility and to encourage and to ensure growth. Apart from that, we also have a graduate visa pass. So after students study in Malaysia, they are allowed to stay for 1 year for 32 countries. I need to mention. So 32 countries are allowed to stay in Malaysia post-study to pretty much, what we encourage, what we want them to do is actually to find time to see what are other kind of study progressions that they can actually explore. After they study, there are a lot of, pathways in terms of not just apprenticeship or internship, but also in terms of progressions of their own degree, what kind of master programs that they can actually explore, what kind of funding mechanism available without having to go through the hassle of going back to their country and then look at it online. So they're allowed to stay for 1 year for 32 countries. And then also, if I can expand a bit in terms of policy, our MQA, MQA, one thing that I need to mention also, it's being kind of, there's a report by UK's Quality Assurance QAA that mentioned Malaysia's T&E is pretty much ready for, the demands of the marketplace, the demands of employment, the demands of, intra countries, T&E specific, qualifications. So MQA is pretty much there in terms of its readiness. So we are also trying to expand it, not just to recognize specific programs, but also to recognize exchange, research, collaboration, blended programs, appel, experiential learning, MOOCs, online deliverable. All of these are things that we are trying to grow so that in terms of its accreditation, so that there's a lot more people encouraged to study in Malaysia and ultimately through our TNE infrastructure goes to the rest of the world. So that's just scratching the surface of what we are doing. There's a lot more in terms of its infrastructure, but I think the time doesn't permit me to talk about all of that. But if there's a question from the audience, of course, I will be more than glad to actually share it with all of you.
Great, thank you. Megan, Asia now hosts more Western branch campuses than any other region. What do you think that says about the region's importance for transnational education?
Yeah, I mean, that was a key finding, wasn't it, of the report? So I think that, it's clearly an indication of Asia's position in the global education ecosystem, on the world stage, if you like. So TNE institutions from many kind of source or home destinations, as we call it, they see the potential now more so where in locations are having trouble, bringing perhaps more international students in if there are visa, government caps, this kind of policy. It's an opportunity for them to go straight to the market. So we're kind of seeing that as more of a driver for a lot of institutions. But there's also, there's many other reasons why TNE works, both for the home nations and also for the for the destination. So going straight to the fastest growing student population markets, having that brand visibility, direct engagement with those student populations, but also for, you know, as we saw in those few slides that I shared, Asia has long dominated that picture as the TNE region of choice, if you like, and all of the economic changes, the prosperity, again, the government initiatives around internationalization, that is all driving the region as an attractive destination for TNE TNE operations. So, and we're seeing, again, you know, seen this over the last few years, the different types of TNE branch campuses, and yeah, seeing that play out a bit more. So lots of different types of partnership happening. But again, having that, I mean, as Shahrill mentioned, that infrastructure, you know, is so important for TNE as well as for a kind of infrastructure locally. Having that transcend into your partnerships and your TNE strategy is so important. And that has to include contingencies and all of those kinds of things as well. So, and I think Asia, you know, it has led the way for a long time now, and it's got pretty much got all of that established, you know, certainly in the more the kind of more traditional Asian education hubs, such as Malaysia.
Marcel, what do you think the opportunities are for institutions outside the region to partner and to take advantage of that transnational education to unlock opportunity?
Right, that's a really important question. Obviously, if education is moving towards Asia and Asia is becoming more of a destination rather than a source market, there are massive opportunities that I don't think should be seen as competitive. In fact, I think opportunities for outside universities from outside of the regions, they will find that opportunities here in Asia are multiplying what they can do in the region. Of course, Asian universities have seen the largest growth of, let's say, in the rankings. So in the US Asia University rankings, there were 557 new entries in the rankings to now expand to 1,500 universities in those 2026 rankings. So there is homegrown, Asia-grown competition, but I think that also presents an opportunity for the institutions outside to partner and to see Asia as a destination, maybe through expansion of the transnational education collaboration. So let's say in India itself, India's opened up fairly recently to overseas branch campuses. There are 16 new campuses coming into India. Firstly, it started in Gift City, but now it's expanded to all over India, all of the major cities as well, out of which 5 campuses are opening up and will be welcoming students in 2026. But it's important to recognize opportunities also with the view that there needs to be clarity of purpose, not just opening up branch campuses and seeing, opening up dual degrees and pathways for short-term study abroad. There needs to be that clarity of why this is happening. You know, it's certainly not a cheap endeavor to open up a branch campus. So it's very costly. So the regulatory environment has to be well studied and well understood. Also, the local market conditions have to be well understood. And for that, you need a partner that's on an equal standing in the country where you're trying to open up those branch campuses. So that's important to keep in mind. Again, it's not only for bringing education to Asia, but it really is to integrate that within the core value proposition, what you're doing here. Also, the access to a huge and emerging talent pool. So, institutions outside are no longer waiting for Asia to come to them, but they come to Asia. Basically, they are establishing themselves at the heart of what's now in the largest, fastest growing market, and having that access to an incredible talent pool, which can then take the universities forward. not only that, but also joint research, innovation, industry-led programs that are also included in the TNE proposition. And at the same time, also market diversification and risk mitigation. We have seen that governments can very quickly decide to restrict the flows of international students, which also then limits, of course, revenue streams. And I think that that diversification into markets where you bring education closer to students, closer to the source, could be one of the strategies how institutions outside can also mitigate the risks. So overall, I think that it presents a really huge opportunity for the institutions.
Shahrill, what models of partnership are you seeing that are effective, like dual degrees, TNE, and what opportunities do you see for institutions globally to collaborate with Malaysia?
Cara, there's a lot of models in terms of partnerships that are there in Malaysia, but to pinpoint specifically which one is more effective or successful, I think it's very contextual to what is the objective, like what Marcel said, to make sure that there's a primary purpose in the partnership. So I would answer this in another dimension, which all of these are very workable. But Malaysia is seen at the moment in terms of its TNE programs as a stepping stone to other countries. For example, we have Monash University set up here in Malaysia. There's actually 20 international foreign branch campuses per se, not just campuses physically, but also programs like, for example, MIT Sloan has a program here in Malaysia, absent of of a physical campus. But all of these are then perceived as then a very affordable, accessible way to achieve overseas recognition or overseas programs or qualifications at Malaysia, which is affordable and suitable or welcoming in terms of its environment. So there's a lot. I mean, to list down the number, there's so many. One which is worth mention perhaps is Harriet Watt. Harriet Watt has a program called Go, where you can move between the 3 different campuses, Malaysia, Dubai, and London, at any given time of their study. So if you take like 1 year in Malaysia and then the balance in Dubai, for example, you still graduate Harriet Watt. You still get the recognition of 3 countries. But then that kind of formula works in terms of attracting, markets that are very different than our normal typical segment, because we are tapping into markets of 2 other countries just by virtue of one particular TNE programs. So these kind of programs are very encouraging in terms of making TNE a bit more flavorful, a bit more, expanded to different market domains and different kind of market programs. But also one thing when we talk about specific partnership, there's also one thing that Marcel mentioned just now, partnership with industries. Malaysia has a specific program driven by Malaysian Digital Economic Corridor, MDEC, called the Premier Digital Tech Institutions. We talk about just now 1,500 new universities in the 2026 ranking, all from Asian countries. But there are some universities which has industry-driven, industry design programs. So in Malaysia, we are also positioning this as one primary offering to the world because it's designed by industries. There's for the life of me, I can't remember the number of the program, but there's hundreds of programs that are within some of these institutions which are not even in the QS or TAG rankings, but are very, very close to industry. And some of these are multinational corporations, Intel, National Instruments, that have actually put their hand in the whole pedagogy, the whole program design, even the lecturer training. And the labs are designed to actually link, to actually mimic the realities of industry. So in terms of skills mismatch, these universities or these programs are very much close, very integral to what's offered or what is demanded by the industry. It's not said much because it's not an international known program, for lack of a better word, or an international known ranking. But it's something that I think is worth mentioning and taking the opportunity in this platform to talk about this. There's a lot to talk about in terms of a partnership, and also specifically mentioning about there's one thing that also I keep on repeating what Marcel mentioned just now, but this is very profound. He said about making sure that the market is not competitive but complementary. And that is something that that Headed What TNE program pretty much expounds. It actually gives that visual perspective that we are not trying to compete with other countries, specifically in Southeast Asia. We know that Malaysia, in terms of its size of economy, is perhaps number 39, 40 in the world. But if you bloat up the lens, you take at ASEAN, Southeast Asia, as an entity, it becomes number 5, in terms of its, economic, attainment. So having that said, it goes the same in terms of higher education industry. So all of the, partnerships that we intend to establish, that we have established, are actually to make sure that there's no competition, that there is actually complementary motivations behind it, that then we can tap. For example, Philippines might be able to tap into markets that has normally been out of our reach. US, for example, they might see Philippines as something a bit more appealing to them in terms of cultural proximity, in terms of English attainment, because Malaysia is not that visible in terms of us being an education destination. But through TNE partnership with institutions in Philippines, which can be done, which has also been in discussion, means that we can tap that market. And vice versa, really, Philippines could perhaps tap into markets that are very much familiar to Malaysia. Muslim countries, for example, Central Asia, that might see Malaysia as a much more appealing destination because of religious proximity, because of progressive Muslim society. Then we can, through TNE partnership with Philippines, can then make sure that both countries can benefit from this particular market. So these are things that we are looking at, not just in terms of designing a specific TNE program, but also to make sure that we can, as an entire region, take advantage of a much more bigger market size and much more bigger visibility. It makes sense also to mention next year would be Visit Malaysia year 2026. So we are going on higher gear on mobility programs, specifically edutourism programs, courses that are less than 3 months and all those. We saw just now the number of people joining, like what Megan showed. The online number in terms of demands are much more bigger than the physical ones for short courses. We want to reverse that pattern. That's why we are going big in terms of our edutourism programs. We're going big in terms of mobility programs. And if we factor in to the investment and then the intra-ministerial efforts that might be put in terms of Visit Malaysia year 2026, hopefully that by the time next year we go into this similar webinar, that number might be different, specifically to Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask some questions from the audience. The first one to put to the panel, they ask, what is the catalyst moment that makes students from the West look to the East?
Who's the question directed to?
You can go first, Shahrill, if you want.
I think the thing on top of my head would be affordability. Because, of course, it's not just that Malaysia somehow could maintain an affordable cost structure in terms of the educational fee, but also, and I can say for the rest of the ASEAN region as well, I think it's pretty much cheaper vis-a-vis compared to European and American countries. But also in terms of livability. So if you have a monthly stipend of, say, US dollars, in some countries you might waste it all on just program fees and also perhaps accommodation. But in countries like in the vicinity of Malaysia, you might have a lot more from that stipend to go around, to experience. And of course, countries in Asia is very well known for its the tourism destination as well. So you get both of both worlds. While studying, you can experience tropical climate and then also the environment in Malaysia. That might be something that is a bit more appealing to the demographics of the West. But on top of that, I think we cannot discount the fact that the quality of study in Malaysia, in ASEAN, has actually pretty much increased. And the accolades and the accreditations has also pretty much been visible and are much more increasing in terms of its
Yeah, just in terms of the student searches, what we saw in the report, as you can imagine, there's a difference between bachelor's and master's students and the kinds of things that they're looking for. I think across, and doctorate programs as well, but I think across all of those is the affordability question, right? But from what we saw in the report was that bachelor students have that choice of where to study for their undergraduate programs, whereas the postgraduate students are more sensitive to the postgraduate opportunities, the scholarships, the post-study work, employability, or research opportunities that that study destinations have. So I think that certainly, a number of Asian locations are extremely good at promoting those employability options, the research ties. And that was one thing that Marcel mentioned earlier about the research credibility growing. We just published a British Council a report about East Asia research and how that has developed over the last several years. It's really growing in terms of that credibility. So I think for postgraduate students, that is a pull as well. So yes, affordability, I agree, is definitely key. But also having that cultural experience, but being tied to those post-study work options, their aspirations for global careers, that kind of thing, has been a key driver.
If I may just,
Marcel has got, yeah,
if I may just add to that, I don't think there's been one catalyst moment. It's been actually quite gradual, but certainly more noticeable in the past 5 to 7 years. And I think that these moments come when students realize that there's unique opportunities in Asia that their home countries cannot really offer. So they naturally would come here. I'm an example of that. I'm also from Europe. I studied here in Asia. And that can be a combination of the factors that have been already mentioned. Affordability as I think the most pivotal and prominent factor, but also value. And I think that that communication of value has become a lot more prominent, certainly with the help of governments, national governments, doing marketing campaigns, going out there and really communicating what's the value of coming into the region. Certainly also tapping on to growing economies of Asia and industries offering internships, job opportunities, entrepreneurial pathways. We know that Singapore is definitely a hub for startups, startup ecosystems as well. So this can be accelerating it. And lastly is also the unique offering and unique programs. We have seen in Asia a shift towards specializations and away from generic programs that are actually quite localized in the context of Asia. And I think that's important in the globalizing and the global economy for students to have that global perspective, incorporating Asia into the mix.
To end, I'd like to ask a question to all the panelists. If you had one piece of strategic advice to give to universities wanting to operate in the region and unlock opportunity, what would that be?
Good. May I start?
Yeah, Megan.
you start.
Yep. My advice is this: don't wait, just come. Because don't second guess the opinion of coming to to Asia to set up presence, because the opportunity is here. If you look at the demographic growth itself, the next era would belong to us, Asia. India is perhaps 1.7 billion in 5 years' time. China 1.4 billion. It's already like more than half of what the world population might be in the future. So this is the where the market is. Africa is also looking at Asia as one destination, and that's a very youthful, dynamic market as well. So there's a lot of opportunities to be tapped here, and because of the fact that a lot of the prominent players are there in the West, it just makes sense to achieve partnership, to set presences, and there's also one thing that I would like to double down, that there's no competition so much here. It's all complementary. So the market that you will achieve is unimaginable. And what Cara mentioned just now, I think Megan also mentioned a bit, and also Marcel, a lot of countries in Asia is also aspiring to become the regional education hub, for better or worse. It means that everyone is working towards it, all hands on deck, especially government initiatives. So it's not just because that there's an economic imperative to it, because there's a social imperative to it. There's also a moral imperative to it. And that's been realized by every country in Asia. And I think it just makes sense. Like, again, I like to reiterate, just do not second guess, just come to our country, to Asia, specifically Malaysia. We welcome you with open hands. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan.
I'm going to counter that and say, come to Vietnam. Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing a lot of work at the moment on sustainable growth, and ensuring student success is at the core of strategy. So I think my advice would be to maintain that student success, you know, at the core of all of these relationships and growth, and strategic decisions. So for English programs, you know, ensuring that assessment literacy is part of your training and teaching to your teachers and your admissions, to really ensure that that talent development goes across your teaching staff and your, you know, your government and all of those exchanges, and making sure that they are robust. That would be my top tip. And we're very happy to support with countries and with institutions in any way we can in building that credibility. And Marcel?
Of course, Asia is a region of opportunities. I think Asia offers incredible space to amplify the strengths of overseas campuses and overseas partners to come here to Asia. As Shahrill has mentioned, it's complementary space. But at the same time, you know, I would say you should really prioritize deep local engagement with the community, with local universities, with industries, and with governments, and really understand the cultural and regulatory nuances, and tailor program to the regional needs, not simply, let's say, transplant programs, what you do well. You can take what you do well, and then you build on it in Asia with the help of the local communities and governments. And Asia has an incredible appetite for partners to come here. I think, as Shahrill mentioned, the pie is big enough for everyone. I think still it's very, very large. But really embed yourself in the local ecosystem, build trust, and then demonstrate that long-term commitment, because it is actually a long haul. So if you're looking for short-term wins, I think it's much better just to be in it for the long game. That would be my advice.
Great, thanks. All great messages to end this discussion, but I think we are just scratching the surface here, so we'll definitely be carrying on the conversation. I'd like to thank our panelists, Shahrill Sabarudin, the Acting Chief Marketing Officer of Education Malaysia Global Services, Marcel Bandur, Senior Business Developer at Studyportals, and Megan Agnew, Global Partnerships Manager at British Council. And thank you also for everyone who's been watching. Thanks for your interest. If you do have any questions that we haven't managed to answer, please feel free to reach out to us at hello@studyportals.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cara. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.